Venice sits just off the northeast coast of Italy at the top of the Adriatic Sea. It's the only city in the world that was built entirely on water. It consists of over 100 islands connected by bridges and canals. During the 5th century, Attila the Hun, a generally annoying individual, and his Mongol hordes were moving down the east coast of Italy, destroying everyone and everything they encountered. Some of the people who were in Attila's direct line of march decided that it might be a good idea to get out of town, and so they migrated across the lagoon to a group of islands. Their bet was that Attila was having such a great time sacking and looting and burning and taking slaves that he'd never bother to follow them across the water. And you know what? They were right. Their islands had virtually no land for farming, but they were perfectly suited to become a center for trading. The Venetians soon realized that the future success of their community rested in their ability to buy luxury goods in the east and sell them to rich people in the west. And apparently, that is still going on. Because there was no farmland, there was no feudal system of landowners and serfs. The nobles were merchants who commanded a fleet of ships to bring stuff to Venice. Everyone in the city was bound together like the crew of a ship. You could inherit money and property, but positions of political importance came by election, and there was constant competition among the important families. The Christian world had been divided in half. The western part was centered in Rome. The eastern part was centered in Constantinople, which was also known as Byzantium. Venice was part of the Eastern Church in Constantinople, but physically it was right down the road from Rome, so it was in an ideal spot to control the trade between the two empires. The primary trade was in spices: pepper, ginger, cardamom, cloves, cinnamon, and sugar. Sugar was often considered a medicine, but the others had almost no nutritional significance. However, they were a sign of social status and the first example of an ideal item for long-distance international trade. They were lightweight and not very bulky. You could get a lot into a small space. They were extremely expensive, and they had an almost indefinite shelf life. For over 500 years, until the early 1500s, Venice was the commercial center of the world. And the Venice you see today is the result of those 500 years of outstanding power and wealth. I had been to Venice a number of times as a tourist, but things are very different when you come with a film crew. You need to know a great deal about the history of the place, what would make an interesting story, and how you can get that story. You need special permits and official contacts. Venice is even more complicated for a film crew because whenever you want to get from one place to another, you need a boat. To make sure I had the best visit possible, I teamed up with Steve Parillo. Steve is the third generation of a family that specializes in bringing American tourists to Italy.
My grandfather started Parillo Tours in 1945 with a $300 Remington typewriter in the Bronx.
Amazing.
And it was right after the war, so the main services was helping the immigrants and their relatives back home in Italy, sending packages back and forth, eventually selling steamship tickets. And pretty soon my father took over, and it was 747s back and forth to Italy, and now we're in the travel business.
Eventually, they ended up with America's largest travel company devoted to Italy. This is the first of a series of programs in which Steve and I travel around Italy. And we try to plan the program so you could take the same trip as we did. In Venice, our first stop was St. Mark's Square. For centuries, St. Mark's Square has been the social, religious, and political center of the city. In 1496, Bellini painted the procession in the Piazza San Marco. Over the years, it's become the most reproduced view of the city, And as you can see, the view has remained pretty much the same. The most important buildings in Venice surround the square. The Palace of the Duke of Venice, called the Doge, the Basilica of San Marco, the main administrative buildings, and the two most visited coffee houses in town. Let's start with the oldest coffee house.